Houston on this Tuesday afternoon, actually about evening time. I'm in Garland, Texas, and Brother Nathan Bragdon is right behind the camera here, and Brother Darren Simpson is sitting in a chair observing what's happening here. And this man to my left is Brother Ron Thomas, who's a longtime friend of mine, and he has agreed to give us a little time, maybe 30 or so minutes, as an interview about the Rodgers Baptist Church Missions Conference. So we just used to call it the Rodgers Missions Conference. We just dropped off Baptist Church, but it's really the Rodgers Baptist Church Missions Conference, because it has a really strong heritage and a good name, and lots of people come here. But it's not my intent to tell you all about this. I want Brother Thomas himself, who's the real authority on the Rodgers Baptist Missions Conference, to tell it. First, we want to hear about who you are, Brother Ron, and a little bit about you personally and how you got involved in the role you are, and just bring us up to speed about this conference.
Well, I mean, Rodgers Baptist Church has been my life. I mean, really. My dad was born and raised in Wichita Falls, Texas. Came home from the war, fought in the Navy, and came back to the Calvary Baptist Church in Wichita Falls. Clyde Darr was the pastor, and his wife Daisy. I remember in my mind as a child that home, and Dad just came back and got into the church and into the Word, and he began to speak to him. Met my mother there, who's from East Texas, but it just happened for him there in that local church. You got to get this local church and Baptist church. A great heritage, and God just did a work in Dad's heart. You know, he started volunteering for everything, you know. And next thing you know, well, he's a deacon. Next thing you know, he's Sunday school superintendent. Next thing you know, he's pastor. He's ready to preach. So his first church was in Vernon, Texas, which is about 50 miles west. And he was there for 18 months at the Eastside Baptist Church, which to this day is a very thriving church there in Vernon. And I was born there, and on the tail end of his ministry there, and somehow he connected with this church in Rodgers, which at the time was just a little country church. So when Dad came, I came, and so I mean, from the cradle up, everything that happened in this church, from the nursery up, I mean, I was a part of, and especially when it comes to the journey that led to the first missions conference. And so I was a part of everyone. I was 10 years on staff with him here. Everything here, I was saved here, baptized, met my wife, married, grew, called to preach, ultimately ordained, participated in not primary, secondary leadership. Did everything there was to do. And so this conference is the fabric of my life. It just has been. It's been quite a journey, and I never ever imagined that I would be back as primary leadership. And here it is. This is our 52nd year.
52.
Yeah. For this conference to continue, which is pretty.
Wow.
So it is my story in some sense.
Well, I have watched it from a distance. Been a Baptist preacher during those years, and was down in Beaumont, Texas for a while, and then over in Houston, Texas for a long while. And in fact, I was thinking earlier about when I first came here, the first conference. I'm pretty certain it was 1959.
Oh my goodness.
When did you actually start? I mean, when did they have the first of these annual missions conferences? Do you remember?
It started. Charles Hayes was the associate pastor at that time, which also connects me with this. But it was in '69.
69?
Yeah.
Okay.
That led to the first conference.
Okay. So I came up here. I heard from Brother Leland Lanier, a missionary to Japan, going to Japan, and I heard about him. There was a fellow named A.O. Alsop.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Brother Alsop.
He was a pastor here.
And was he?
On two different. He has two tenures here. My dad, when he came here, was the 8th pastor. Church was organized in 1931, and it was organized as a BMA church, Baptist Missionary Baptist Church. Mm-hmm. So missionary was in our title, but we weren't. But yeah, he also was a dear man.
Well, he encouraged me to come here, and connected through Brother
Absolutely.
Lanier, and
Absolutely.
I actually came to some kind of function up here. You know, that's where I got acquainted with Roy Dearmore and James Dearmore and those good men, D.F.
Yeah.
Dearmore. That whole group, and Independent Baptist College was kind of in the, not this church, but it was in the mix up here.
Mhm.
And boy, I didn't realize just what a good group I was meeting into. I mean, you know, getting connected to.
Yeah, so we were talking about the conference in 1969, but I mean, there was a journey before that. I mean, it culminated in that, but it was going on. You know, missions here was dynamic and going on long before the conference. The conference was just a byproduct of that.
Yes. And so you were really here from the first conference, and from '69 till now, you've been having one every year.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Including in a COVID-19 year, which is not the easiest thing to do when
Can
you
you
talk
believe
about
that?
that. But what's the difference between the way this group that comes here does missionary work and say other groups that are
Well,
good people and Baptist people? but they're not
Exactly.
doing the same way?
Here's the deal. This church was BMA, so it was not so centered. And the pastor before my dad, Brother Denton, for whatever reason, and I'm assuming the right reason when it comes to autonomy of the church and those kind of things, brought this church out of the BMA. And it was not pretty. And we still have Doyle Walker here. Was a longtime deacon, and Doyle connects with that time. But he brought it out, and so when Dad came, he had two challenges. He was moving our church from being a country church to more of a city church, and then from moving from a BMA mindset to an independent Baptist local church missions mindset. And he fought those battles early. And as a kid, I remember seeing some of the heartache. And you can take a church out of the BMA, but you can't take the BMA out of the church. And so what happened over time, there had to be some attrition. I mean, it was sad, but my dad implemented a different mindset. And Dad was convinced of the supreme doctrine of ecclesiology, and that's everything is local church. Every church was given authority to do the Lord's work, and he began to implement with purpose. He started a printing press, and that was a part of it. Got that? You know, that was the day offset press, and so you know when you was on staff with Dad, anybody got ink all over them because we had to print. That was just it. And by that time you were printing mission letters and prayer cards and yada da and evangelism and all of that. So it was a very exciting time. And with that, Garland, the city of Garland, was experiencing its growth pains, and that's where it kind of had its maximum growth. So it was like the perfect storm. You know, all of these things come together with Dad's dynamic and his vision. Dad was a visionary. And he was a consummate kind of a businessman as well, and he had a gravitas. And here's another part of all this story. Dad was an evangelist, and that was the heyday of the revival meeting, and every church had one or two a year. Yeah. That would amaze me because the churches would have them out for revivals, the same church, year after year after year after year, you know. And it was a lot east and a lot north, and he met men like Norman Wells. And so here's where it really started, you know, making these mission connections, these church connections, because this became these relationships that he built through revival meetings, and then the beginning to grow a mission vision here that ultimately culminated in what our conference provides, and that is the whole networking thing, you see. And but he forged the way with his preaching, his charisma, his vision, the revival work. Then a fellow pastor by the name of M.L. Mosher, never will forget M.L., who was in Central Baptist in Little Rock. And M.L. was a missionary too, and he was a pastor with a missionary's heart. And he and Dad developed a very close relationship, and Dad took a mission trip. And I tell you, I know, but Dad took a mission trip with M.L., and Dad was kind of bushed, you know, I mean, God really ignited him. And back then, Dad loved to take pictures. So, you know, the Kodak and the slides and, you know, the chrome, the film, and, you know, anyway. Take pictures, you know, and come back. And so here I'm a little kid, you know, pastor's kid sitting in the church, you know, and Dad would come back from a mission trip with ML, and Dad would speak the slides, not a missionary, Dad would. And boy, and then this fellow named Brother P.V. Zug,
Oh, yes.
missionary to the Middle East, Lebanon and Egypt, and his family, and then they would come. And all of their Middle Eastern garb, you know, and do their thing for us, you know, their presentation. And then Dad took a trip to the Holy Land with Brother Zug, and so here go the pictures, and here he'd come back. And so over a process of time, then we began to have our own missionaries, you know, and the Dearmores and those men. Yeah. And I wish I could put it in a bottle. You could not make it happen again. It was just something that you can't recreate. But back then, when it came to missions among independent Baptists, it was a romance. I don't know how else to say it. About that, going out of a church and going to a country and being a missionary, and it was intoxicating. So it was just an amazing thing.
Brother Ron, I call it a revival, a missionary revival. I certainly don't want anybody back home or who will listen to what we're saying later to get some idea that this is the first time there were independent Baptist missionaries and missionaries sent out of churches. Back when I look in the scripture, I know that's how the Apostle Paul went. He went out to church in Antioch, and then, you know, you just see the Bible model there. But somehow, through the years, we got away from that. Baptists got away from that.
No, I think so.
And consequently, the idea of sending missionaries not through a church, but through some sort of sending institution, some sort of a missions society or a board, I mean, like they did in London, England, sending those great guys like Hutson Taylor or people over there, doing those things. It moved outside of churches and somehow into these parachurch type organizations. And I would just go on record and say that's not all bad. I think there's some really good work been done for
absolutely.
That. But I don't think it is the model way that we see right in the scripture. But this thing that happened with your dad here in this church, Rodgers Baptist Church in Garland, Texas, was sort of a revival of getting back to doing it the right way. Getting back to
absolutely, I believe so. I think it was a rediscovering our purpose. And Dad would, you know, I mean, ecclesiology. We call ourselves independent Baptists, but at the core of who we are and our identity is not a bunch of standards for dress and the cut of the hair and the dress and all that. The core of our independence is ecclesiology, local church.
Amen.
And I mean, in Rodgers Baptist Church, I mean, I remember being a kid in what we call training union, and a deacon, Everett Vance, teaching us boys to memorize Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20. At the Great Commission. I mean, that became our bread and butter. I mean, it was our meal. We just digested that. And then in Acts, you know, of course, Christ established the church in his earthly ministry, the head of the church, connecting the last chapter of Luke with the first chapter of Acts, and then talking about the empowerment of the church that was already in existence, not the birth of the church, and that kind of thing. And then culminating in chapter 13 and 14 with the Antioch, Syria, and the sending out, and then there's so much the coming back in chapter 14, and reporting to the churches, and it was just there. What do you do? How do you argue with that? How do you argue with that?
It's obvious in the scripture, and I think many of the men who are now involved with here and who have been for the last 30, 40, 50 years, you know, they knew that all along, and just couldn't seem to find a venue to express themselves and do it in that way. And then suddenly comes this rebirth of churches actually sending out, sponsoring, governing, taking care of all the business of missionaries, doing that. And guys like, yeah, I'm on. And this place became the focal point. Right here, where they could come, and in my opinion, the strongest, I would say, help or boost to this cause through this church is the networking aspect of it. The fact that these missionaries, and I'm seeing them up here right now this week, they come here, some of them don't really realize so much where they've heard I can go to Garland, Texas in July every year and I can meet lots of preachers. And I may get a lot of appointments and schedule, and get some support raised. They see that. Maybe they don't even altogether realize what they're getting into and see it for the right reasons altogether. They just need some support, and here's where they can get it. But when they get here, they begin to realize this thing will work.
Yeah.
Churches can send missionaries. They don't have to have some tanglement. You're seeing that too, aren't you?
Yeah, and we're not independent of God, and we're not independent of each other. And we use, the word cooperation is not a negative word. We do cooperate. We work together. To do that, we must network. And so with a thought of there's no ecclesiastical organization over the churches, right?
Right.
And so the weight of connecting is upon pastors. So the first vision for this conference was different than most. It's not an in-house, it's not a closed, and with our membership and about a few, and there's nothing wrong with that, not at all. This was bold. And it also, Dad was the guy to do it because it was all his baby, and he was creative, imaginative, and we're going in '69, so we're in the '70s, and we had black lights across the back of the sanctuary, and black with the fluorescent letters, and we would turn it, and there was the Great Commission, and all the lights were out, and we would sing Lord of the Harvest or something, and Dad was just a master. And then encouraging missionaries to come and bring their displays and all of that. It was a heady time, and it was an exciting time. So we began to see the need to know each other. So if you know the pastor and the missionaries out of the church, and you hear the pastor preach, and you feel good about the pastor, but then you can feel good about his missionary. You understand? And it's the pastor's responsibility for him, but you can come along beside. So it was church to church. And so when God, we were taught that one of the greatest things, and I think still is, that can happen to a church is for the Holy Spirit, like we see in Acts chapter 13, to reach down inside a body and call out and say, separate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Separate these men.
And all done through the church.
And ordain them and send them out. Authorize them. You have the authority. I gave it to you, all authority. Yes. And that was a church commission.
Yes.
And the church was empowered to do the work, each church. And so it was with the church at Antioch, which is a unique church in time because it was largely Gentile. And God was doing their thing. So it was just, that was the seed. So yeah, the conference, I think, the only reason it's still here, and a lot of things have a life, and I understand that, but its general bare purpose is so practical.
Yes.
It's practical.
Yes.
The greatest compliment I can have is, hey, I was a missionary, independent Baptist, local church sponsored, church service, church sit, and I came here and I got my appointment schedule all booked up. Look at this. Whoa.
Yeah.
I've had missionaries come and say, not ours, others come and say, I have found that the men who attend this conference are more serious about mission work than any other conference I've ever gone to. So that is the best of things to hear.
Yes.
Because that really is what it's about.
Yeah, very fortifying, deeply satisfying to see that God can use you in this church in facilitating this work of His. And I think it's important to the folks back home to realize what happens here at this Rodgers Baptist Missions Conference. This is not just a fellowship meeting. The preachers get together sometimes just to preach to each other and talk about other things. This conference is about missionaries and about missionary work, about evangelism around. And it's not just a getaway. It's a place where we come to work. I've been in this myself a while, this missionary work and pastoring churches and independent Baptists, present missionaries, and sometimes getting in touch with pastors. They're all busy and you can't get them on the phone, and you can't always get an email answer quickly, and so just scheduling a missionary or dealing with some missionary issue can be hard. Sometimes it takes a while.
Yeah.
I have found that I can come up here to this Rodgers Missions Conference, and in one half a week, basically Monday through Wednesday or Thursday, I can get more things done. I mean, it would take me 3 or 4 months to do what I can do in 3 days up here. It's just I'm talking about from a pastor standpoint, let alone a missionary standpoint. So it really is a facilitating time for us. And Ron, I want to thank you for that. In this church, it's a commitment to do this. I mean, it's a financial commitment. Costs lots of money to do this every year. And the work that goes on, this conference, this church feeds everybody a breakfast and a lunch and a dinner for 3 or 4 days around here. They're now involving the young people. This week they're having a vacation Bible school for younger children, and a youth conference has been in progress here for several years now.
Yes, that happened I had an associate youth minister say, can I have the kids? Can I have the young people? So, it's just amazing. I could have never planned that. That was never a goal, and yet look at it's perpetuated itself. And God's called. There's some. Actually, Brother Petty John, who is my associate and minister of music and youth and whatever, he was called to the ministry as a young teen visiting this conference. So there you go.
I believe I read something in the Bible called fruit to your account. I mean,
I didn't even know that. So I was talking. Josh came to us, and I said, by the way, and he would tell me that, and I said, oh my goodness, Josh, I can't. Well, let me just say this, and Dad was marvelously used and it's wonderful, but he couldn't have done it without a good church. And this church, it's a very humbling thing, and we have. I'm humble about it, and I'm always amazed that, and this year, especially this year, in a COVID year, and we just got back to doing everything, getting our ministries back, Sunday school and all that, 1st of June. And when we first said, well, we got the possibility of having this conference, at first they kind of caught their breath a little bit, and then began to think about it. And then as we began to prepare, I saw what this conference does. It breathes life into them and purpose. And this is something that local church missions does for you. I cannot tell you that when you send out a missionary out of your church and you do the work and it's yours, and the financial burdens becomes yours and the prayer requests become yours, and that missionary goes out and he establishes a church and he organizes a church, and sometimes it might be even close, and where members of your church can attend the organization, and we go through the process of the authority and granting that, because they all become members of our church via our missionary as he baptizes. And then on that business meeting day, when we say we bequeath the authority of this church on such and such a day, we give our pastor the authority in our stead to go to such and such a place, and at such and such time pronounce them a church. And then you bring that back. Why would you want to do it any different? It just does when you can write a check and do missions another way, but you cheat yourself. Yes. Because it adds something to the depth and the purpose of a church that I think God intended from the very beginning.
Yes, amen.
And it pays back in ways, and yeah, it is a sacrifice. And yes, we have gone on credit for boats in the East China Sea, and for airplanes for Roy Dearmore, and vehicles for Roy Dearmore, and we have put these good men put their names on the line to guarantee that money. And I mean, it's put up or shut up time when you're in this responsibility. But my goodness, the dividends. I mean, what comes back to a church and breathes back into a church, I cannot. So we have that picture there in Acts chapter 14 where they do that.
Yeah.
They do that.
It's right there in the Bible.
They come right back and how else can you cut that down? That's a local visible body, and they come back to that church and say, okay, we want to tell you what God did, you know? And it was quite an adventure. And then they shared again, and it happened. It happened right there with that church.
Yeah. And you're seeing a modern version of it.
Absolutely.
Time and again.
And other churches have.
And yes, and we've seen it at
That
Houston,
repeat
where
the
I
path.
am. Sure have. Would you explain a little about this list that you keep of pastors and churches, and kind of just designed to help churches and help missionaries? I mean, can you explain that a little
Well,
bit?
you know, it's just a cumulative. Year after year after year, we always look for new first-time people to attend the conference, and so we begin to keep their information, the connections for their church, their address, and time. And then what we used to do is by the end of the conference, and it was always hard to do this, but we would print out all of those pastors, missionaries, all their connections and information, so that and then put that in their hands. Now we do that online. You can download it off of our website, and now not just this year's attendees, but past years, you know. And recently we've gone, you know, I say over time we've gone paperless. We're pushing toward that, going paperless. So we have what I learned new words, a dirty bailing, a dirty list. A dirty list means that, you know, churches are living things. So pastors change, you know, addresses, they move, some of them go under, whatever, but you need to try to keep that list as current as possible.
Yes.
And so now, of course, you know, with the digital, all those with emails and numbers, and so that's very important, because that puts in their possession vital information of those that are like-minded pastors and missionaries, that they know, and the missionary now can have a place to begin.
Yeah. Give them a leg up.
To call. You know, you've got to do the lead work. You've got to do the deputation, to call, and I'm a missionary, and da 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 da, and then here we go. So.
And it helps to say, I know Brother Ron Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
I have his backing. He's not necessarily guaranteeing me, but, you know, I know as a pastor, when I get a call from a missionary wanting to come to my church,
Mm-hmm.
I want to know who are you? I mean, let me hear something. How do you know about me, and how are we connected? So this is a big plus. It paves the way. It's sort of, as I said, a leg up, I think, on how we get into each other people's lives. It's this networking thing, which is the key and strength of this conference.
And during the conference, you know, I mean, we have 3 meals. You're talking about that, but I'm just convinced that some of the greatest work of this conference happens at a breakfast table, or a lunch, or, you know, those where they're getting to know each other. And so we tried to provide that time in there as well. And as far as the preaching is concerned, we all need that. And since so I take the missionaries that come, and we do vet them as much as we can. But put them before other pastors, so that they can get that exposure. And we give a missionary the same time allotment as we would a preacher or pastor, whatever. But anyway, it's just to know and be known, and to know somebody and connect and bring them in.
Well, we get to sit in the pew and listen to these men present their work, see their mission presentation, hear them preach, as well as the pastors give us some charges. But the real work goes on, as you said, at the lunch table, dinner table, at breakfast, you know, at breaks, talking to each other.
Oh yeah.
Well, just last year, I was up here, and we were at that time looking for a replacement for me. I'm trying to phase out and do some writing, but I had learned about Brother Darren here, our current co-pastor, who's going to soon be our senior pastor. On Tuesday afternoon, he and I met in a room over here at the hotel, and we spent, maybe 1 hour or an hour and a half, really getting acquainted. So it's just a part of that kind of networking and work that goes on.
Yeah, and there's been romances here where, you know, the couples meet and get married and become missionaries and eventually pastors or whatever. You know, I mean, we you name it, it's happened here. We've had in the context of this conference, a couple of people come to me and says, "Can we borrow your office?" Sure. And they have some disagreements. They have some things they need to sort through. So they come in my office, they sort through. Well, we're going through the conference, you know, and so, yeah, God does that here, and it's just all wonderful things happen here.
I wouldn't want folks back in Houston or others listening, as I've indicated, to misunderstand.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Rodgers Baptist Church runs 5,000 or 6,000 a Sunday.
Oh, goodness.
This is an ordinary, reasonably small church. You have, how many people you have here on, say, an average time before
200,
COVID?
something like that.
So it's, I think the reason this has worked so well, it's of God. It's not like it's a little church trying to do something over its head. And it's not just Rodgers Baptist Church. They're sort of the core and facilitator here. But they have the help and the backing of others, not churches sending their money here to this church and it taking care of it all, but as a sort of hub to help with this. And it's not just a one generation thing. This man's just talking about his dad.
Yeah.
And he was here for 30 or I guess or more
36 years.
36 years.
Yeah.
He said, well, as soon as Brother Thomas is gone, this will all die.
Pretty
At least
amazing.
Brother Charles. Well, it's not dead yet. How long have you been here?
32.
32. You've had a monopoly here for a while.
Well,
but it's still alive. That's what I'm just talking about. The reality, this thing's of the Lord.
Yeah.
And it's working. Let me ask you, Brother Ron, what could people like Brother Darren here, who's pastor of a church in Houston, and there are many others in here, and some that couldn't make it every year. I couldn't make it like this year. But they're of the same soul, the same heart. What could these churches do, these pastors do, to help facilitate this whole thing that we know is of God and help Rodgers Baptist Church with this conference? You can think of things specific other than show up?
Show up. There's all kinds of, we as pastors, we get missionary calls all the time, about, can I come by, can I preach, can I whatever, and to use that as an opportunity to herald the biblical view of missions. That they may not see the things the way you do, but to be able to, with the spirit of love, communicate that. And know of a place that where you can come and maybe be encouraged and meet other men. And I think that's so important, like-minded men getting together. And so that strengthens, and they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I know so many pastors who are in the process of talking to open men, pastors, about biblical mission work, church-centered, responder, church-centered, and say, well, just come with me. And seeing is believing. And I've seen just being included in this conference. And so we have, every conference, we have men here who are out of clearinghouses or, used clearinghouses or whatever, and are other-minded, but they just find nothing but a warm, open reception here, and a freedom, hopefully, to ask questions,
Yes. Brother Ron, I want to thank you for giving us this time in your life. I realize you have a conference in progress right now, and in fact, the service is going to start in 30 minutes.
No idea.
We've got to get out of here.
Yeah.
But I think the folks back home have enjoyed this. I'm sure they have. And I think it's good to set an order, rather than, well, he's going off to a conference, the pastor is, or to understand what's going on here, the gravity of it. So thank you for sharing with us.
Well, it's a joy. And over the years, we've procured here a man who knows what's important. And I think that one thing that my dad did with this conference is try to keep a big tent. You know what I mean?
Okay.
That we know what is important. This is Romans chapter 14. We can differ about lesser things.
Yes.
And make them lesser and keep them lesser.
Absolutely.
And agree and work for the gospel. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, it sort of overshadows everything else.
Yep.
And for the cause of Christ, some flexibility is in order.
I think so.
And I'm just so glad that I've been personally privileged to know your dad, considering one of my great heroes and best friends, and now to know you all these years. It's just been a blessing.
And thank God for those who go before us. We can't ever forget that.
God forbid that we ever do. Well, I'll say goodbye to the folks back home. Again, thank you for being here and watching today. And Brother Nathan is the man with expertise with Facebook and all the social media, and he will tell you if we're able to have other interviews with maybe some missionaries and things of that sort. But thank you for this Tuesday night, which is Wednesday night on Tuesday night for us back home in Houston. We'll say goodbye for now.